Check it out, lines are everywhere. Here's an example of a really curvy, squiggly line, and this happens to be over by the sink. It's all this yellow stuff. Yeah, it's a hose, but it's a double line. Check out the flag. Red lines, white lines, of course blue stars. Even this little lamp pole that we have over by the paper cutter, that's an example of a line when you think about it as a straight black line pointing up and down. Even the lines over here, the grid on the paper cutter, also lines. More lines! Hey, 5th grade, we're going to be creating a project using lines and value, but also incorporating something called negative space. Now, when you look at this milk crate that I've turned upside down in our classroom, it's a pretty decent example of positive and negative space because we can think about it like this. Anywhere that you can actually touch something and feel it, that's a positive space. Anything that you could put your finger through would be a negative space. Another way to think about it, we're all sitting in one of these chairs. That black piece right here, and also the metal pieces, these are all positive space. We can feel them. But this little guy right here, that's a negative space because you can put your hand through it. Same thing down here. All this space right here would be negative. Think of it like this, a ladder. If you were climbing up a ladder, everything that you'd be touching would be a positive space. Everything that is in between is a negative space. Alright, as we've talked about using line, we're actually going to use our own line to create the front of our project. Once you've folded your paper in half, you're going to use a nice wavy line right down the middle of your project. And then you're going to use 3 more lines going across. Now each time you make one of these lines across, you want to try and keep it going that same kind of curve that you started with. So what you should end up with is about 3 or 4, just like mine, little blocks on each side, so 8 total. Now what you guys are going to do in there is you're going to choose 2 colored pencils, and you're going to begin using value to shade those in. Now just to recap real quick, value, and you don't have to do this on the inside, I just wanted to show you, value is pressing hard with your pencil, but then slowly creating a nice soft transition from that hard dark into a nice light, which would eventually be able to blend it in with white. That's value, also known as shading. Everything that happens in between this dark and this light, that smooth transition, is called a gradation. The benefit of shading on a project is that it takes something that looks cool, looks like it could be a 3, and starts to move it up more towards a 4 and makes it look a little bit better because there's more for us to look at. Now what you're going to do is create something kind of like a checkerboard pattern. And I'm going to start by using some dark value right here, pressing hard, and eventually shading it out nice and light. Now if you're one of those kids who shades just a little bit and calls it good like that, push it out a little bit farther. We want that shading and that value to come almost all the way out to the end, kind of like this. You can always shade back over things by just going in and pressing a little bit harder and taking it all the way down to the middle and then starting your gradation. Be careful not to color outside of the lines because we're going to end up using our other color over there. Your sketchbook would be a great place to practice a little bit of extra shading before you start your final piece. And right about here, I'm lightening it up, just like that. So we've got that dark moving smoothly into that light. Now some of us are going to find a little bit more success holding our pencil farther back, and I'm going to show you that on this one right here. I'm going to turn my hand a little bit so you can see it in the camera. Since we're creating a checkerboard, this is blue, this will be blue, and this will be blue. Sometimes it's easier for me to hold a pencil a little bit farther back, that way there's less pressure on the tip. And like I said, make sure you're coloring inside the lines, unlike that. And you're going to do the same thing through here. Again, if you're one of those kids who shades about this far and stops, remember to pull it a little farther out. And here's where I'm going to start to lighten it up a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, until it's almost perfectly blended in with the rest of that white space. Now, if you end up with something that you end up seeing some hard lines like that in there, that's okay. Don't sweat it. Just take your dark, dark, and pull it out a little bit further and cover that up. Or if you end up with something down here, that's okay too. You can actually color all the way to the edge if you need to, making sure you're filling up all the white space if that's the case. So you end up with something like this. Now our video clip is going to fast forward quite a bit through the next few sections so you can kind of see quickly how this one color is going to look. It's a little bit of what the finished piece should look like after you've got all your values added in with both colors of pencil, filling up all the line spaces. Now this next part is going to be up to you, but you can use a marker to retrace the lines that you originally drew with pencil. Here's what I mean. You don't have to use black. You could use a color if you'd like to, but you're carefully going to retrace over each one of those pencil lines so we have a nice, neat outline around each one of those little wavy squares. And don't forget the lines straight down the middle. Now if you're like me and you accidentally kind of colored out of the lines, just use a thicker line with your marker to cover up any pieces that might have accidentally snuck out. There you go. Now at this point, stop for a second, flip your project over, double check to make sure that you've got a name somewhere small on the back. After this, you're ready for the final step, which is going to require your paper and, a pair of scissors and an extra piece of black colored paper. All right, on your black paper, what you're going to do is you're going to end up using a shape, and it can be a shape that you imagine on your own, and you're going to draw it out with a regular pencil. Since it's on black paper, though, to make sure that you can actually see it in the video clip, I'm going to use a white colored pencil. And the shape I'm going to end up using on this small piece of paper is going to be a shape kind of like a ladder. Imagine this is the top and this is going to become the bottom. It doesn't have to be a perfect representation. You could make your own shape. But if you do make your own shape, remember, you're going to have to use positive and negative space. Now think back a minute to when I showed you the clip with the chair and with the milk crate. Anything that you could put your finger through or put your hand through or stick a pencil through was the negative space. So what's going to end up happening here is you're going to have to figure out which part of your shape you want to be a positive space and which piece you want to be a negative space. Anything that you've decided is going to be a negative is going to be cut out. Now keep that in mind so you don't end up with a super uber complex negative space that you then have to try to figure out how in the world are you going to cut that out with scissors. Now even this is going to be a little bit challenging to cut out the inside pieces with these gigantic honkin' scissors, but I'm going to show you a couple ways to do that. One of the ways you can cut out negative space is kind of just like thinking back to your early days and very, very carefully making sure not to poke your fingers. Push the blade through. Now, I wouldn't recommend that because it is possible for us to end up poking ourselves. So here's another easier way. Gently fold that shape in between a few fingers and just start a cut along the line. Open it back up, and that will give you more than enough space to get the blade of the scissors through there and finish cutting around it. Of course, if you ended up with something that's got a smaller space than that and you're just completely and utterly stuck trying to think about how to cut it out, I'm more than happy to help. Just raise your hand and I'll be over there as soon as I can get there. Positive space negative space. Positive space on this happens to be the black space. The negative space is all this space around out here, but also this space in between. Now comes the fun part. We get to do a little bit of gluing to finish this project up. Anytime we glue in the art room, we always want to make sure we're gluing on the side that has pencil. And I know it's pretty hard to see in this video clip, but I've still got a little white pencil around the edges. So think of it this way. Glue goes on the side that your pencil goes on. And just like we learned when we were little kids, dot, dot, not a lot. This is important for a few reasons. Reason number one, if you use too much glue, it can wrinkle your paper. If you use way too much glue, it'll squirt out and end up gluing itself to pretty much anything that happens to be attached to it when you're ready to stack your work at the end of the period. Now it's up to you where you want to put your shape with your negative space. Personally, I think they look a little bit more balanced when they're put in the middle. But what we want is something that looks like this. So we have our positive spaced shape in black, but now through the negative space we can see some of our op art style value and pattern. At this point, you're done with the glue. Take that top, twist it down so it doesn't dry out, please and thank you. And you're ready to choose a color of marker to write your name and the year on what is now the cover of your sketchbook. That is an example of a finished piece. Now, for those of you interested in shooting for that 4, you have an entire blank back cover. If you're interested in designing that back cover, here is your task. You are going to choose a single color of marker, and we're going to begin to make a line pattern just like that. So, this is the enrichment part, which means you don't have to do this piece in class. But if you want to make sure you're shooting towards that 4, this would be a great way to start it. All you have to do for this is start with a curvy, maybe pointed, maybe angular line. Anything you can come up with. And what you're going to end up doing is taking your marker and retracing that line until you can no longer fill up any space. If you want to, you can also add a few open spaces in there. Just make sure you fill them in. Now this might seem a little bit easy at first, but your challenge is to try to get these lines equidistant, which means you've got about the same amount of space in between each line. They don't have to be entirely and utterly precise, but they should be fairly close in terms of the distance in between. Some of you are looking at this going, hey, that kind of looks like the pattern on the table, or kind of like the pattern on a piece of wood, and you'd be correct. Let's see what happens when we incorporate a letter. I'm going to continue this pattern all the way to the end. Voila. Of course, I left a little space down here for my name. So, right now we're ready to take our journal pages, put them on the inside right here, fold it over, close it, and guess what? Because I'm such a nice guy, I'm going to staple them in there for you. So please make sure that the pages are arranged the way you'd like them, because once they get stapled, obviously they're in there semi-permanently, which means we can't just take them out every single time. We need to move them around.